Hello everybody. We will look at the concept of static variables and static members in C++. Whenever a class is declared, the memory is allocated to the variables of the class only after an object of the class is created. This makes intuitive sense because only when an object is created, only then those variables would be needed, and there is no need for us to allocate the memory for those objects beforehand, and also we do not know how many objects of that type class would be created. But there are sometimes there is a requirement that the moment a class is defined, there should be some attributes about the type of the class which should be recorded or which should be kept track of, and this should be independent of the objects created and the number of objects created, or even if there are no objects created. So this demands that as soon as a class is defined, some sort of memory should be allocated to this type of variables. Such variables are called as static type of variables of the class. So a classic example is a variable which keeps track of the number of objects. Okay, so of course in that case, because the objects count will be 0 in this case, but there has to be a space in the memory for the object count. Hence, it is mandatory that it has to be declared as static because this memory should be allocated as soon as this class is defined. So in this case, we have this object count variable. It is declared as static. So as soon as this class is defined, this object count memory has been allocated for this, and it is initialized to 0. Static variables are always initialized to 0. And every time the constructor of the class is called, basically constructor is called when the object is created, the object count is incremented, and that is how we are able to keep track of the number of objects created. Now here another thing to be thought of is if we didn't have this way of doing it, then just by looking at a specific object, there would be no way of finding out how many objects have been created in the entirety of the program. Another thing regarding the lifetime of this object is that the lifetime of the static variables of the object is throughout the lifetime of the program object of the program. Unlike whenever an object's lifetime is when it is created, and when it is destroyed or when it goes out of scope, the object variables memory is released. But in case of static variables of a class, their lifetime is equal to the program's lifetime. So here we see this case where we have this every time we created these two instances and these two objects, and the object count got incremented, and we are printing this object count. Another thing to notice, to access the static variables, we need to use the scope resolution operator, which is this in the middle. So let us run this code and see. So the expected output is that we have created two objects. So the object count should be 2 in this case. So as you can see, two constructors are called and the two object counts are. Now let us look at static members. So static members are basically their functions but of the type static. And so again, the key idea here is that these functions they can be accessed even if there are no objects of this class. And there is another restriction on the static member functions is that if they have to operate on some variables of the class. Those variables have to be of the static type. So this makes sense because if we have a static type of member function, so that means this member function can be called whenever there is no object of the class also. And in this case, it starts, if it is starts accessing object variables, then it would not be possible because the object is not created and the variables won't exist. The only variables which exist even if the object is not created are the static variables. So there is a restriction that the static type variables, static member functions should be allowed to manipulate only uh, static variables. So here we have again we have this object count function and we have this get count. So get count is declared as static. So because it is declared as static, if it has to operate, it can operate only on static type variables. So it operates on object reg count. And similarly, there is a set count. Again, it is declared as static. So if it has to operate, it has to operate only on the static type variables. So that's why it can operate only on object count. Another thing to note here is that a non-static function can operate on static variables. That's about static member functions and static variables.